We are back with Consultervations. It's another week. And Kevin, have you noticed that Eric has put us in the small windows?
I have. I think there's something malicious about that. What's going
Yeah,
on?
it's like we've asked him to do something today, Kevin, haven't we? This is what he does with the control panel.
Sometimes you just got to take control.
Well, in a friendly way, I once heard.
Oh,
So we are back with amazing Eric Swick, Swick Business Strategies from Denver, Colorado, and of course, the man himself, Kevin Turnbull, President of RLCLA and VP of RLC Consult, our Academy and Training School for Consultants in the US. So we're going to talk to you about something important today. Eric, what's the planned subject this week? You may as well tell us.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about leaders being both selfless and selfish, and where it may be appropriate to use both of those.
So when we talk about leadership as a classic question, then, so where does being selfish and selfless usually sit? So what do people normally say about it in our shared experiences?
Well, I think, selfish always has a very negative context to it. So they don't think of themselves as being selfish. They want to think of themselves as being selfless.
And why do we think that is?
I think it's just that context of what people think of when you're selfish. It means you're not sharing, you're not willing to, I go back to childhood, when, you're playing with other kids and you don't want to share your toys. That's being selfish.
So, sorry, Eric, you had toys. I mean, I remember me and Kevin, we only had to play with sticks and stones outside, Kevin, isn't that right?
That's it. That's indeed. Although, I think the whole idea of, I think what you're saying there, Eric, is that selfish versus selfless has been, it goes back into the eons of history in terms of human dynamics. But I think there's a leadership concept. The whole idea of selflessness is actually quite new. I mean, certainly when I started my career in the 70s, working for some big corporations, there was much more of a climate of selfishness. Leaders had to be strong. They issued orders to get results. They never, ever said, what can I do to help you improve your productivity or increase your results? They're always about do this, do that. So I think there's a modern interpretation of selflessness, which is a great thing, by the way.
Yes. It's interesting, Kevin, that you say that because, I started my career in the 70s too. And where I found it wasn't necessarily from my leadership, but it was more from peers where I felt there was selfishness because they didn't want to necessarily share because it was this race, who can get ahead of the other person. And so there was this competitive environment for, who's going to get that next promotion, who's going to get rewarded. And that's where I saw it.
I think that's absolutely right. And so the culture was actually generating a selfishness because we were all climbing the slippery pole. And I think that's a great example of it all. And that's just what it was like when I started. It was all about grade chasing. Sure, you were performing and you were producing results, but there was an unhealthy aspect to the culture, which was blindingly obvious to me and my like-minded peer group.
It's a really good shout though, Kevin. I think that it is also slightly misinterpreted, isn't it? This being selfish and selfless. I think one of the reasons, Eric, is that we've got so lost in a critical leadership ingredient of humility that we sometimes confuse also humility with being selfless. And what we often forget is some of the best work about humility that I've read or studied. My favorite work is Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. As a consultant, it's probably the best book I've ever read. Mm-hmm. But what you can miss when he talks about level 5 leadership, it was humility and edge. You can't develop your edge, can you? Being selfless. Yeah. Or can you?
I think you can. I do. I think in Kevin's point earlier about, he's talking about how it used to be. I don't think you can operate that way today. I don't think organizations, teams, people are looking for that kind of leadership any longer.
Yeah.
They're desiring something, a more selfless type of leadership.
Yeah.
I think that's totally right, and I think with the advent of millennials being, over 50% of the workplace, they've got different values to kind of boomers, our boomer generation.
Yeah.
And they need to be managed in a different way, which is much more consensus oriented. It's much more shared, ownership, culture led. To be honest, if you try and be a selfish leader, I think you'll be shot down in flames, or recognized for what you are very quickly. And generally, in my book, and I've worked for some of these people, selfish leaders, they kind of fear two things. They fear being exposed as incompetent.
Yeah.
And they fear being exposed as an imposter, that they're not a leader. And they generally overcompensate by being more selfish. So it is kind of self-defeating in a weird sort of a way. I don't know if you agree with that,
But I actually think it's a great reflection back to the past and up to the moment, because you talked about millennials and all the other generational tags that you can have. And Eric, your point, people are looking for a different style of leadership. But I think one of the things that selfish versus selfless argues as a debate, it's actually arguing about two different states of mind as a leader, isn't it? When should you be selfish? In an article, which is from the book Leadership or Leader, that one, written by me, of course, there's a quote by Herbie Mann that says, being selfish to me means that you have to look out for yourself and you don't have to sacrifice. And actually, what we're not saying is that that's the case. We're saying that's an interesting perspective. There is sacrifice in leadership, right? Yeah. But there are times I think you've got to be selfish. Internally, I think, is where that applies the most, Kev. As in, if you're not ready mentally, if you're not ready in your mindset as a leader, you've got to be selfish about doing that properly. Because if you haven't done it,
you do have to be. And I don't think this sort of discussion would ever say that being selfish is always bad. That's a great example, Dave, of getting your mindset together and recognizing that you might not be quite on track. I used to be very open with my teams that I've managed that I will always have a consensual style.
Yeah,
I will always involve you in decision making, so your voice will be heard. But when it comes to making the final decision, I will be making that, he said selfishly. After considering all the evidence, and I expect you to go along with it because your voice is being heard and it might have been outvoted. So that's an example of a selfish leader, or some elements of selfishness in a leadership style, which was all about, managing a team appropriately.
Yeah.
Yep.
Dave, you put up this saying here, being selfish or selfless, which is right. And I don't think one is or the other. And I'd be curious to know, Kevin, you just gave a great example. Can you think of some other examples of where, both being selfish or selfless makes sense for a leader?
I can think of one. I was with a client yesterday on Zoom, of course, and I was telling him to be selfish because he was working his butt off for the board of his company. He hasn't had a vacation in 2 years. And I was telling him, look, man, you've got to be a bit more selfish about this. Selfishly, you've got to get your work-life balance sorted out, and because you're going to burn out. And you're not getting much credit for what you're doing, and you're certainly not getting much enjoyment from what you're doing. So take control, be a bit more selfish, stop giving all the time. So that was a very recent, yesterday example of the importance of selfishness.
Yes.
Totally great example, Kev, and good question as well. I see that we've got a definition up here, Eric, which is talking about what selfish leadership is actually meant to be. Let's take a look at this for a minute. self-initiative is not one of being internally greedy or arrogant. It's serving your knowledge first. That's interesting, isn't it? Serving your knowledge.
Yeah, and that's one of my thoughts is where I would be acceptable to be selfish is where you're doing some self-development. Maybe you need to take some time out from being at the office and go do some personal self-development. And that it's somewhat selfish, but it will be better for the organization. I just think of a lot of the training I've been through over the last several years. It's made me a better leader.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting cultural debate to extend to that, and that is the amount of paid vacation that people take. Now, in America, the paid vacation that people take is kind of less than 2 weeks on average. I don't know what the right number is. And so even when you've got paid vacation, in your contract, you tend not to take it because the cultural norms in business are, oh, no, you'll be letting people down if you do that. You're taking too much time off. Compare that to the UK and the EU, where, including bank holidays, everyone gets 29 days paid vacation, and you're expected to take them. And if you're not, you're kind of letting the organization down because you're not recharging yourself and developing yourself. I've worked with a lot of UK and US companies across the pond, and I've always thought this was fascinating. Really, it seems ridiculous to me, the US way of doing things, because it doesn't recognize that people. It kind of says that people are dispensable.
Yeah.
If you burn out too bad, we'll get another one. I think that's shocking.
Because in some financial institutions, I've heard where they mandate you have to take so much time off because that's how they can discover whether there's any fraud going on.
Well, there you go.
In a bank or some kind of financial institution, if anything corrupt is going on, it'll get uncovered while they're gone.
Great, yeah.
So what about selflessness? How about thoughts on that? Any ideas or experiences you've had?
It's a great question, isn't it? Well, I think I've experienced selflessness personally the most in the role of hosting, where someone's looked after you. And actually, in America, we talked about the job front in America. One thing America, I think, does really well is when you stay with people, they just know how to make you feel like you're welcome to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And that often goes right behind the scenes. There's a funny conversation with Marilyn Manning when we stayed with Sean and Marilyn in Denver. I won't go into the specifics, but her willingness to take care of our travel needs literally knew no boundaries, and she was willing to do all of our laundry and all kinds of laundry and everything, and it made me laugh because, of course, being mildly sarcastic only on occasions, I wanted to I asked her whether she would iron my kilt socks, and because they look a little bit creased, and she said to me rather calmly, "Watch it, Evans," which I thought was quite funny. But it was an example of she's very good at hospitality, and America is really famous for this. And I think there's an effortlessness to selflessness when you're serving people, I think.
Right, and serving people can actually, I read a great quote from an army general, and he simply said that leadership is all about to lead is to serve, nothing more and nothing less. But of course, serving has many dimensions to it. Serving can be about getting your people developing themselves. By taking an interest in their potential, their talent. It's not just some sort of collaborative approach to management and leadership. It's actually quite deep, and I don't think you've come across that many truly selfless leaders.
Yeah, I think of two things when I think of selfless. One is a personal example I've had where you may have a disgruntled client, and I would normally step in front of the employee and take the brunt of that uncomfortableness that was being delivered by a client. And I think that's being in some degree selfless, because I didn't want the employee to be harassed or to be beat up upon, and I took that brunt. And I'm okay with taking that role on. The other place I see it is something we talk about often is delivering soul food to employees. I think that's where you're recognizing people honestly and sincerely about efforts that they've made. It's not about you. It's not about you taking credit for things. It's giving the credit to where it's due.
That's a great shout, and it seems to be coming up as a subject and a tool, soul food, more and more, because I think there's a lack of it in business, isn't there, where we're so focused on all the other things that we forget to notice great work being done. I think there's also a fundamental reason why Ken Blanchard's making a comeback, right? With his latest books, I can't remember what it's called. Is it Pour Your Heart Into It? No, that was Howard Schultz. Something to do with the heart, lead from the heart, or something like that. But in terms of selfless, I think I wrote down a couple of things out. Going to your question, I wrote down anything that requires servanthood first. I was telling Kurt Rickoff about an All Blacks story. If you're listening in America, they are the best rugby team that has ever existed in the world of rugby by some way. Kevin, would that be fair?
I think so.
And there's something about their mindset and DNA that they are going to become the world beaters. But I asked Kurt a question today as we were looking to change the channel in our conversation. And so I was listening to their book Legacy by James Kerr today, and they'd just beaten Wales at rugby 42-7. They'd gone through all of their debriefings and all that kind of stuff, and even that was impressive. And then I said, back in the changing rooms, when they'd done all their debriefings, the coaches, the players, what was the last thing the top players in the squad did? Can you guess so this is a player you can research him, Richie McCaw, right? The best All Blacks captain of all time. And he was one of these 5 players. What did he do after all of that in the changing room after the match? Can anybody guess?
He picked up everybody's dirty laundry.
You're close, Kev. Eric?
I don't know, maybe bought them all dinner.
Which would have been nice.
Yeah.
He picked up a broom and he swept the changing arena and the facilities. And the reason why he did it is that they have a motto, only an All Black looks after an All Black. And being an All Black means you're prepared. So they cleaned up after themselves, even though the cleaners were coming next.
Yeah.
And if you are watching this from Britain, maybe England could learn a lot about that. Anyway, next up is another thing I got selfless for, is compassion and empathy. Because I think, going to your soul food point, Eric, sometimes tiredness and fatigue gets in the way of great selfless leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst it's also the same warning, isn't it? That it's got a dual-edged sword, I think. Sometimes it's the warning we should rest and recover. Other times it's where we've got to pay attention to compassion and empathy required by people we may lead. What do you reckon? What do you reckon, Kev?
No, I think that having empathy is really important. I do remember in one of the companies I ran, one of our major revenue streams was gift cards and gift vouchers. And there's always a breakage in that business where people don't redeem them. And unlike the US, this was in the UK, we had an expiry date on our gift cards, and it was usually set at a year. And I was starting to hear these conversations, outside my office in the main body of the office, where people were talking to customers on the phone and explaining to them why it was just too bad that the expiry date had expired and they should have used it earlier. And I'm sorry, we can't do anything about it. Now, the employee actually weren't very happy about this because it was confrontational. So I got everyone together and we kind of brainstormed it. And I said, I think what we should do is anyone that rings in, we should right up front offer to extend it by another year because we could reset it with our technology. And so we had the situation where customers were calling in expecting to have a fight And we just said, I'm very sorry to hear that. That's not a problem at all. We'll reset it for another year from today's date. And if you can't manage to use it in a year, just give us a call and we'll do the same thing next year. Now, this didn't happen very often, but we changed the situation because we were being full of empathy and selflessness. But actually, it was brilliant business because these people became brand ambassadors for us. And we're telling people we knew that, wow, those people at Sparfinder, they're amazing. They're just, their service is just brilliant. And so I got rid of the uncomfortable situation with employees. I made our customers, who were at fault, but I made those customers brand ambassadors for us. And it was a massive win-win all round because we were being selfless. You know, right up front, we were saying, no, we understand. You know, it's a hit on our revenue, but we don't care. And so there's just an example of where, you know, leadership made a significant difference to our business.
Yeah.
I've got one, Kev, that follows on from that as a tip then, because I think what you demonstrated on my note sheet, I'm just gonna validate, Eric, because you've asked the question. Can you see my note sheet there? Great questions, right? I think a selfless leader has to be willing to ask questions that actually might hurt them as much as the situation, because the answer is more important than the question being answered. And if the answer is detrimental to you, you should ask the question. You can easily avoid it, can you?
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, Dave, is it's really about being vulnerable, right? As a leader.
Yeah.
And, you know, by doing that, you are being selfless.
So I also wanted to clarify a couple of things you asked about. I've got some tips I made a note about listening to Kevin about when to be more selfish. And I actually think three of them are really easy. And then I will ask Kevin if he's got any more, Eric, right? So Kevin's probably got loads. But I wrote, lead yourself first and have your mindset in shape. Get feedback and manage your mental and physical well-being. You got to be selfish about those things, I think.
Yeah.
Because you can't be selfless with what you haven't got.
No, that's right. I think you've got to be selfish with your time as well. Your time management is a bit of a selfish activity, but also reflects good management. So, and I talk about time management a lot with my clients because they're mostly useless at doing it. But you know, I talk about the difference between something that's urgent and something that's important. And urgent usually comes from somebody else.
Yeah.
But people will prioritize urgency because it seems urgent rather than focusing on the important things, which could be, you know, the strategic stuff, the planning, the 2-year time horizons and setting goals are actually hard things to do, but fundamentally important. So I think you've got to be kind of selfish about, you know, allocating your time, because time doesn't come back. As Dave was saying there are some things you just can't get back. So there's a degree of selfishness about managing that, I think.
So,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How have we done, Eric, answering your questions?
You're great. Great example.
Oh, you're a top man. That's why he's in the big screen today, Kevin. He's on Soul Food Autopilot. I love it. Right, I think it's a real consideration. At the start of the year, I was talking about there'll be a moment in these early months where people are going to be emotionally fatigued because we've been living under this constant threat of COVID, this constant threat of rule changes, constant restrictions to society and communities, right? And normal features of things that in America you do, in Europe we do, in the island of Britain that we do, right, Kev? So we're under this tension. But I think as a leader, I guess we're inviting the question, if you want to keep your people fueled, start to think about what you need to be selfish about so that you've got the level of energy, focus, fuel to be able to support them. Does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Because I think the energy crash is coming, isn't it? I see it in people now who are tired. And anyone who's tired today, my only concern for them is, if you were telling me you were tired in November, I could understand it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't be tired today, right? I can understand why many industries are. Yet it is still February. So the problem is the same. We're in month 2 as opposed to end of month 10, month 11, 12, where you'd be thinking, all right, that's fair enough. So I think people are going to, I would like to invite people to think really hard about this, about where they might need to be selfish today and act in order to be available tomorrow and fresh, or just normally.
Right. I'm glad you brought this up, Dave, because I think we're all seeing that kind of mental and physical exhaustion from lockdowns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that mental and physical exhaustion breeds selfishness, because people get to a breaking point and kind of say, "I've had enough. I'm going to do something for me now." And probably a bit of a survival mechanism somewhere in there. And your point, Dave, about making sure that your reservoirs of spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being are topped up is so important, because when you're topped up, you top other people up.
Absolutely.
And it's a great example of selflessness, because you're recognizing your role in motivating and encouraging other people to not be in despair or not be at the end of the tether. So looking after yourself, really important. Keep those things topped up, because it's infectious, a bit like a disease, but you're infecting goodwill.
I like that. I also like the fact that you've reminded me of something, and I'm going to share with you something that happened to me many years ago. I was dealing with a legal dispute, right? And if you've ever been in that situation, I'm sure we all have, right? And it's the situation where you're reading the legal letters, right? And there's something about reading law that's being aimed at you in your name, right? That takes all the energy out of your fuel reservoirs, right? Because there's something about the language that's so potentially destructive. It just makes you go, ugh. Anyway, finish the ending of the story and then I'll make the point. Good news is there was no legal threat. It was mitigated and it was all nonsense and hullabaloo, right? But even though when you're reading it and you're thinking this is hullabaloo, this is nonsense, until it's resolved, it feels like that. Anyway, I went in a coffee shop during a break of a workshop to go and get a coffee, naturally. I decided to have a bit of millionaire's shortbread, Kevin, to wash down my coffee, right?
Good call.
And there was an old couple who were having their soup and whatever in this cafeteria place, this cafe, British cafe, slightly posher than just a cafe. And I said to the lady at the till, I'd like to pay their bill. Do you happen to know what it is? And she just got confused. Yeah, but I haven't given them their bill yet. I said, I know, but do you know how much it is? And before people think, wow, what a great guy. No, I was being selfish. I was blessing an old couple that had inspired me in the moment to take action, to make them go, who on earth did that? And, as a secret. So I could actually physically and spiritually top myself back up, right? That was years ago, right? Years and years ago I did this. But I remember I was intentionally being selfish about a good act, Kev, because the actual act itself is what was going to recharge me.
Yeah.
And that's the bit you were just talking about, isn't it? It charges both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the bit I'm talking about. Yeah.
So that's interesting. That's a selfless, selfish act.
Correct. There you go, Eric.
Interesting.
No, we need a new word for that, I think, Eric.
Yeah, I guess so.
a combo hybrid word.
Of course, not that I use this app at all, but and nothing against them. I haven't got the time. And when I did first discover it, it took up too much time one day when I think 90 minutes went by. And I'm talking about the TikTok app. And I remember looking at all these funny videos, and it was the weekend, and I'm going, oh my word, 90 minutes have gone by. Shortly afterwards, I deleted the app because I don't actually have the luxury to lose time like that. But, what some people do is they do acts of kindness like this and film them. And what I'm suggesting is the acts of kindness are private, they're not filmed, they are secret, they are selfish. And the joy of the selfless is for the other person. In the same way, I have been in a Starbucks drive-through where somebody in front of me bought my coffee for me. It changed my whole day. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's being aware that, Kev, your point again, and an action for anybody watching this today or listening is, how can you be selfish with selflessness? Because, Eric, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So any final tips from you guys about what we've been talking about today as we bring this to a beautiful close?
The only thought I have is, trying to think more about this and trying to be both, selfless as much as you can, but at the same time thinking about things about focusing on yourself that may appear to be selfish, but it's for the better for other people.
I agree with you, Eric, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said and pull out something you said earlier. The All Blacks confirmed this today. Get serious and selfish about your self-development and skill development.
Yeah.
And be selfish to do that as a leader, but also allow your people to do the same. Because a great company is a place where people are committed to action based on things they're learning. What do you think, Katie?
Well, I think I always challenge my clients to, I'll ask them, so when was the last time you sat with individuals of your management team and said, what can I do to improve what you do? It's a classic selflessness of trying to extracting the benefit from it all. And the answer, sadly, is not often.
Yeah.
It should, in my mind, it should be a planned activity of sitting down and saying, okay, and when you're a coach to these people, they often come up with kind of petty stuff, and they unbundle all of their anxieties and frustrations. But I will just go back and say, well, when was the last time, instead of grouching about this guy, when was the last time you sat down with them and said, and just got honest and real? But start from that point of view of, how can I make your job easier? Yeah. How can I make your life easier? That's the selfless leader. That's the leader who's trying to serve.
That was a really good period moment, wasn't it? Full stop.
I like that. I thought that, yeah. Let the silence speak for itself.
Correct, Kevin. A bit of soul food for Eric. Eric, we both really appreciate you guiding us through this today.
Sure.
And assisting us with the questions about it and being a different voice of reason. So just want to echo some thanks to you, my friend.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That was great. Really important subject.
Yes. It is. And as part of Consultervation, we've been looking at whether being selfish or selfless is right as a leader, both historically, today, and with some great insights from Kevin and Eric as usual. Eric Swick back with us again from Eric Swick Business Strategies, of course, in Denver, Colorado. Thank you for your time, Eric.
Yes, thank you.
And the marvelous man with the aura from California, Los Angeles, actually, president of RLC LA and VP of RLC Consult USA, our consulting and training academy for advisors. Slight tweak on the start. So thank you both for your time. And we'll be posting this across all the platforms tomorrow with plenty of suggestions and ideas that's come out of this conversation. So every success with your learning.